Montana Territory. Autumn of 1879 snow had not yet touched the earth, but the cold had settled deep, in wind and bone and hearts turned hard. The wagon door slammed behind her. "Keep walking," one of the elders barked. "You brought shame to this town, and we do not forget." Vera Vance clutched her daughters tighter, one on each side. Daisy held her hand with too much strength for a girl of only 6. Delilah kept her head down, her tiny jaw clenched like she understood more than anyone wanted her to. They walked past the church steps, past the mercantile, past the line of townsfolk who had once shared bread with her during harvest festivals. Now they looked away, or worse, looked right through her. Her husband, Joel, had died in a mining collapse nearly 2 years before. He had debts he never told her about: gambling, bad loans. When the creditors came calling, the elders blamed her, said she must have known, said she had sullied the town's name, said she had no place among decent folk. So they banished her, a widow, with 2 little girls. No supplies, no horse. Just the clothes on their backs and the rickety wagon from Joel's last job. They made it 5 miles out of town before the axle cracked. Vera stood in the middle of the empty trail, dusk closing in around her like a noose. She pulled the girls close and sank down into the dirt beside the broken wheel. Her arms were around them before the cold could settle in. "We will be all right," she whispered. "Mama will figure it out." But the truth was, she had nothing left to figure with. Several miles away, Garrett Hayes was riding back from 3 days on the trail with a crate of supplies tied to his gelding. He had just finished a delivery for a rancher outside of Silver Creek and was aiming to make it home before nightfall. He spotted the wagon first, half-tipped in the ditch. Then the woman, and the 2 girls huddled against her. He slowed his horse. "Ma'am?" he called out. Vera's head snapped up. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "Are you hurt?" he asked, swinging down from his saddle. "No," she said, voice rough. "Just stranded." He crouched and looked over the axle. "Snapped clean through. You are a long way from town." She hesitated. "We are not going back there." Garrett looked at her then, really looked. Her dress was torn at the hem, mud drying on the sides. Her girls were shivering, cheeks red from wind. And the look in her eyes, he had seen it before in soldiers right after the war ended. A look that said they had lost more than they could carry. He stood. "I have a cabin 2 miles west. We can get you warm, get the girls some food." Vera blinked. "You do not even know us." He nodded toward the girls. "Do not need to. No way I am leaving children out here in the cold. Come on." Daisy looked up at her mother. "Mama, can we go?" Garrett untied a wool blanket from his saddle and draped it gently around Delilah's shoulders. "It is not far, I promise." They walked beside the horse, Vera holding each girl's hand. Garrett led them, quiet but watchful, the way a man does when he is used to being alone but does not mind making room. His cabin was small, tucked between pine and rock, but it was warm and smelled of bread. He stirred up the fire while Vera sat the girls down on a wool rug. He moved without asking, filling tin cups with warm broth from a pot on the stove, handing one to each girl, then finally to Vera. She stared at it for a second, then took it with a quiet, "Thank you. You are welcome." He glanced at her again. "Name is Garrett Hayes. Vera Vance." He nodded once, then looked at the girls. "And you too." "I am Daisy," the older twin said, lifting her chin. Delilah peeked out from behind her mother. "I am Delilah." Garrett smiled softly. "Well, you are safe now. All of you." That night, Vera tucked the girls into quilts Garrett had laid out near the fire. They slept quickly, exhausted beyond their years. She stood staring into the flames long after their breathing settled. Garrett handed her a mug. Not much, just boiled water and herbs. helps the nerves. She took it, fingers brushing his for the briefest second. You do not need to keep us. I know. She looked at him. You are risking a lot. The town, if they find out, I do not answer to them. I do not have much, Miss Vance, but what I have you are welcome to. Her throat tightened. Thank you for not looking away. He met her eyes. Some things you do not walk past. Days passed. Garrett repaired the axle, but she did not ask to leave. The girls helped him gather eggs from his hens in the morning, their laughter a sound he had not heard in years. Vera cooked stew one night and bread the next, quiet in her work, but steady. She hung laundry behind the cabin, patched his spare shirt without being asked, and slowly something settled between them. One afternoon, Garrett found Vera behind the cabin, staring toward the trees, arms wrapped around herself. He stepped beside her. You all right? I keep thinking they might come for us. Like the banishment was not enough. She turned to him. I do not know how to protect them from people who hate us. He looked at her, voice steady. They do not get to have the last word. She blinked fast. I was not supposed to be alone in this. You are not. She met his gaze then, eyes wide and full of a quiet ache. I do not know what comes next. Well, he said, his voice lower now, you could stay, for a while, or longer. Her breath caught. He stepped closer. I care about you, Vera. And I want to be here, with you, with them. Vera's chin trembled. It has been so long since anyone looked at me like I was worth choosing. Garrett reached up and touched her cheek, slow and sure. You are not just worth choosing. You are worth fighting for. She leaned into his touch, then into him, her arms winding around his waist as his wrapped around her shoulders. For the first time in too long, she exhaled. That night, under the same roof, the girls sleeping between quilts and dreams, Vera and Garrett held each other like they both knew exactly what they had found. And neither had any plans to let it go. Garrett came in from the barn with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, dirt smudged along one forearm and a coil of rope draped over his shoulder. He paused at the door, watching Vera through the window. She was kneeling near the garden bed, turning soil with a rusted trowel she'd found beside the shed. Her braid hung low beneath a patchwork shawl, and her hands moved slow, careful, like she was coaxing life out of something long buried. He stepped inside, setting the coil down near the hearth. Delilah sat cross-legged by the stove, folding strips of muslin into dolls. Daisy was at the table, tongue pressed to her lip as she tried copying letters from Garrett's old newspaper with a pencil worn to its stub. Garrett hung his hat on the hook and crouched beside Delilah. Making a whole family? She nodded, not looking up. This one's the baby. She cries a lot, but not too loud. Smart baby, Garrett said, tapping the doll's cloth head before standing again. Vera came in a minute later, brushing dirt from her palms. The frost hasn't set too deep yet. I think we might get some carrots if we cover them. We'll do it tomorrow, Garrett said. I'll help you lay the burlap. She gave him a short nod. Thank you. He poured 2 mugs from the kettle and handed her one. She leaned against the wall, eyes on the girls, then took a sip. For a moment, nothing passed between them but steam and the creak of logs settling in the fire. You ever think about leaving here? She asked quietly. He kept his gaze on the stove. I used to. When I first bought the place, I figured I'd fix it up, sell it off, head south. But you stayed. I did. She turned toward him. Why? Garrett let the silence stretch a moment. It was quiet. I'd seen enough noise. Vera traced the rim of her mug. Joel used to talk about going to California. Said the ocean would make us feel small in a good way. Garrett glanced at her. You ever seen it? No. Closest I got was listening to a peddler describe the waves outside Carson City. He leaned against the opposite wall. You miss him? She didn't look away. Parts of him. He was kind to the girls. But he made choices that left us with less than nothing. Garrett nodded once, not pressing further. Daisy stood then, holding her paper. Mama, is this word right? Vera bent to look. Almost. That's a B, not a D. See the curve. Garrett watched her gently guide Daisy's hand. Her voice steady, patient. There was something in how she crouched beside her daughter, how her fingers moved with quiet certainty, a strength that didn't ask for notice. After the girls were settled in bed, Delilah curled beneath her doll family. Daisy clutching the pencil in her sleep. Garrett stepped outside with Vera. The wind had quieted. Above them, stars stretched like frost across black glass. I keep waiting for the girls to ask when we're leaving, she said, folding her arms. They don't seem in a hurry. She looked out toward the dark hills. They're starting to feel safe. That's not a small thing. Garrett's voice was low. Neither is trust. She turned to him. I'm not trying to take what's yours. I know this place is yours. It's just land and timber, Vera. You and those girls, you make it something more. She held his gaze. You're a good man. He shook his head slightly. Not always. You are now. He took a step closer. I want you to stay. Not because I pity you. I want you here. Her breath caught. I've been trying not to hope. You don't have to try anymore. She reached for his hand, steady now, and he closed his fingers around hers. Neither spoke again that night, but they stood side by side until the cold sent them in, the door closing soft behind them as the fire cast long, gentle light across the floor. The first snow came during the night, quiet, steady, and thick enough to soften the world by morning. When Garrett opened the cabin door, the trees stood hushed and white, their limbs bowed under the weight of it. Smoke curled from the chimney into a sky the color of tin. Vera was already awake, kneeling at the hearth with a pail of ash beside her. She glanced up as he stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. You'll need the sled, she said. The wagon won't make it through that. Garrett nodded. I'll hitch the mule before breakfast. Daisy and Delilah were still asleep, curled together like pups beneath a pile of wool. Vera rose, brushing ash from her hands, and reached for the kettle. She didn't ask what he needed from town or how long he'd be gone. She simply poured 2 cups and handed one over. You'll be careful? She asked, voice low. Always. She hesitated, then looked at him fully. There's a man named Trace Harlan. He owns the feed store. If he gives you trouble, don't answer him. Just walk away. Garrett studied her face a moment. He the one who started it? He was Joel's creditor. When the debts came due, he made sure everyone knew what we owed. I won't give him the time of day. She nodded, but her fingers curled tighter around her cup. Garrett left before the sun lifted fully, the sled creaking behind the mule as he turned onto the trail. The snow muted the world, dulling hoofbeats and the sound of the runners over packed ground. He moved steady, not rushing. He didn't like leaving them alone, even for a few hours, but supplies were low and the hens weren't laying much in the cold. Back at the cabin, Vera kept herself busy. She swept ash from the corners, then used the leftover flour to make a thin griddle cake for the girls when they woke. Daisy asked if they could go outside, but Vera shook her head. Not without your boots, and they're still wet from yesterday. Delilah didn't argue. She sat by the window watching the road, her doll tucked under her arm. Midday passed quiet. Vera stoked the fire and mended a tear in Garrett's coat where the lining had come loose. The girls played with pine cones they'd gathered earlier in the week, arranging them like a tiny village between the floorboards. When Garrett returned, the sled was half filled with sacks flour, beans, salt, and lamp oil. He whistled low as he stepped inside, shaking snow from his shoulders. "Road's icy by the bend," he said. "But I made it through." Vera took the sack from his hands. "Did Trace see you?" Garrett set the rest of the supplies down. "He saw me." "Didn't say a word." She exhaled and turned toward the stove without replying. He watched her a moment, then went to the girls, lifting Daisy into the air until she squealed and Delilah grinned. He set them down, tousled their hair, then took off his coat. Later, after the girls had gone to sleep, Vera lit a candle and sat near the window, mending another sleeve. Garrett pulled a stool beside her. "You always sew when you're worried?" he asked. She didn't look up. "It keeps my hands busy." "You don't have to be afraid of him anymore." "I'm not afraid of Trace. I'm afraid of what men like him can turn others into." Garrett leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "If he comes here, I'll deal with it." Vera threaded the needle again. "I'm not asking you to fight for me." "I'm not offering to fight," he said. "I'm offering to stand beside you." Her fingers paused. "That's not a thing I've ever had." "You do now." She turned toward him, the candlelight catching the edges of her face. "You mean it." "I don't say things I don't mean." She set the needle down slowly. "I'm not sure how to be with someone who doesn't expect me to earn my place." Garrett's voice was quiet. "You're already here. That's the only place I want you." She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I keep waiting for something to fall apart." "Me too," he said honestly. "But it hasn't." She reached for his hand, not tentative, not unsure. He took it, and they sat like that, candlelight flickering between them, while outside the snow thickened into drifts, sealing the world into stillness. Neither of them moved to break the quiet. They didn't need to. The creek behind the cabin had frozen shallow by morning, a thin glass of ice veining over the water. Vera cracked through it with a stick and filled a pail, her breath ghosting in front of her. The air smelled of pine sap and wood smoke, and the quiet was the kind that settled in your ribs if you let it. She carried the water back toward the house, careful on the frost-slick path. Garrett was in the woodshed, splitting kindling with a rhythm that didn't ask for praise. He didn't glance up when she passed, but she knew he'd heard her steps. Inside, Daisy was stitching a square of cloth onto a flour sack, tongue peeking out in concentration. Delilah sat on the floor beside her, holding a button between her fingers like it was a coin. Vera set the pail near the stove. "Once the water's warm, we'll wash your hair." Daisy didn't look up. "Can we use the lavender again?" "There's just enough left." Vera bent to add more wood to the stove, the scent of cedar rising with the heat. When Garrett came in, he smelled of cold bark and iron. He set a basket of kindling near the hearth and straightened, rolling his shoulder once. "You favoring your left again," Vera said without looking. He rubbed the spot near his collarbone. "Old break. Left it wrong after the war." "You ever let anyone set it proper?" "No time for doctors when you're 30 miles from the nearest one." She stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "You should let me grind some comfrey for it. Takes the ache out." "I'll take it if you're offering." "I am." He nodded once, and that was enough. Later, while the girls hung damp linens on the rope behind the stove, Vera mixed the poultice with a horn spoon. Garrett sat still as she worked, shirt off, back to her, the firelight catching the long scar that ran from his shoulder blade to his ribs. Vera didn't ask where it came from. She pressed the warm mixture along the bone with her fingers, slow and even. "You don't talk much about before," she said. "Not much to say." He kept his gaze fixed on the flames. "I was a quartermaster's son out of Wyoming. Took a bullet outside Franklin and never went back." "You had people?" "A sister. She married a Kansas man and stopped writing after the first child. Figured she had her own to worry over." Vera wrapped the cloth around his shoulder. You never wondered what they'd think of you now? Bringing in a widow and her girls. I wonder what kind of man I'd be if I hadn't. She tied the knot at his collarbone. You didn't have to. You could have left us there. Garrett turned to face her. But I didn't. No, she said, quieter. You didn't. He reached for her hand, fingers warm from the fire. You think about staying through spring? I do. And after that? She didn't answer right away. I want the girls to grow without shame hanging over them. I want them to know what steadiness feels like. You think they've found it? They're beginning to. He moved closer, cupping her cheek with the side of his hand, his thumb brushing the edge of her jaw. And you? She leaned into him, the answer already in her bones. I don't feel banished anymore. Garrett kissed her then, soft and certain, like the land had folded itself around them and nothing could shake it loose. When Vera pulled back, the corners of her eyes were wet. No one's ever made a place for me without asking something in return. I'm not asking, he said. I'm offering. You, me, them, we build it together. Outside, the trees held their snow in silence. Inside, the fire burned steady, and the girls whispered over their dolls, unaware of the small, solid promise just made in the quiet space between two lives that had finally learned to rest. The days lengthened slowly, the way they always did after the first deep snow. Cold still clung to the mornings, but the light shifted more gold than steel now, edging toward something softer. The cabin breathed with it, filling with small warmths. The scrape of Daisy's pencil over new paper Garrett had brought from town, the hum Vera made under her breath while sewing, the low rasp of Garrett's voice reading aloud from an old book as Delilah dozed against his side. No one said it outright, but they were settling into a life. One afternoon, as Vera hung the girls' dresses near the stove to dry, Garrett stepped in from the porch. He carried a parcel wrapped in oilcloth, his boots damp with melted snow. I took a ride out toward the old logging road, he said, setting the parcel on the table. Found something. Vera wiped her hands and untied the twine. Inside lay a faded quilt, the stitching worn but delicate. It was caught in the brush near the bend. Looks like it's been there a year at least. She ran her fingers over the fabric. This pattern, it's Cheyenne. Thought you might know it. Vera glanced up. My mother's people were traded through that region. She used to tell me the women stitched stories into the corners. You can read them if you look close. Garrett leaned over her shoulder. What's this one say? Vera traced a row of small diamonds. It means shelter found, usually sewn after a long journey. He didn't answer right away. Then, seems like something worth keeping. She folded it carefully, her movements measured. I think it is. Outside, the snow began to melt in earnest, dripping steady from the eaves. The girls pressed their faces to the window, watching the icicles shrink. That night, Garrett stepped out to check the mule's tether and found Daisy sitting on the porch step, her knees drawn to her chest. Your mama know you're out here? She nodded, her eyes on the trees. Something on your mind? Daisy bit her lip. Do we have to go back? He sat beside her, the boards cool beneath them. Back where? To town. To where people look at mama like she's bad. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. No, you don't ever have to go back there. She looked up at him. I like it here, even the quiet. He reached out, brushing a leaf from her braid. Then here's where you'll stay. She leaned against him without saying anything more. By early spring, the creek had broken open, tumbling fast over the rocks. Vera stood at its edge one morning, watching the water surge past. Garrett came up behind her, boots careful on the thawing ground. I've been thinking, he said. She turned, shielding her eyes from the sun. About what? He held out a small tin box. My mother gave this to my sister before she married. She gave it back to me before she left for Kansas. Vera opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a square of flannel, lay a narrow silver ring. The band was simple, the metal dulled by time. Garrett's voice stayed steady. I'd like to give it to you. No preacher's words, no paper. Just this. You and me. If you'll have me. Vera looked down at the ring, then up at him. I don't need anything grand, she said. Just something that lasts. Garrett took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger, and she didn't look away as he did. They walked back to the cabin together, the sun warming their backs. That spring, Garrett added a second room to the cabin. Vera helped raise the beams, her hands calloused but sure. They built shelves for the girls' books, a wide table for meals, and a bench under the window where Delilah liked to sit and hum to her dolls. That summer, they planted squash and beans in long rows, the girls barefoot in the dirt, laughing as they chased the hens who'd started laying again. In autumn, Garrett traded 2 cords of cut pine for a sewing machine left behind in a widow's barn. Vera stitched dresses for Daisy and Delilah and taught them how to measure and pin and cut. The girls made a patchwork of scraps into a blanket for Garrett, and he used it every night without exception. As the years settled around them, life took on the shape of something steady. Vera never asked Garrett for more, and he never gave her less than his whole self. He built a cradle when a boy came, quiet and strong like his father. They named him Joel not for the past, but for the promise of something made right. And when the snow came each winter, heavier some years than others, it brought no fear with it. Just the hush of a home tucked warm against the earth, the sound of laughter behind its door, and the kind of love that asked nothing but gave everything. They grew old that way, together, always together.